Welcome back to Wrong Sports as I kick off a new series on this channel called Coaching Stories, all about the most interesting coaches in college football, interesting coaching stories, or coaches that aren't talked about enough. This next story is about a one-hit wonder at one of the most prestigious universities in all of America. The title might be Notre Dame's blunder, but it is more of a blunder in a few ways, because it may have been a blunder in hiring this coach, a blunder in the way they treated him, and a blunder in the way that he left. This is the story of Terry Brennan, the Notre Dame football coach that really no one ever talks about. But before I get into this coaching story, make sure as always you subscribe to the channel below and of course ring the bell so you get updates on brand new videos that I will be dropping all throughout the rest of this year. If you haven't already shared this channel, please share this channel with other college football fans. Of course, like these videos, share videos. You can help out my channel by checking out my podcast, and you can also donate to the Patreon. The link is in the description below. So the story is about Notre Dame, and I'm not going to do a huge history lesson on it. All I'll say is it's one of the most recognizable names and brands in all of college football. Notre Dame, of course, made their quick rise with a 1913 upset of Army. Following that, they hired Knute Rockne, who brought their name out of northern Indiana and into the big cities of Chicago and New York. But after Rockne's untimely passing, Notre Dame went through a few coaches and some mediocre seasons. That would be until they hired Frank Leahy in 1941. Leahy was the former Boston College coach as well as a tackle on Rockne's final teams. Leahy's love and passion for Notre Dame produced an 80% winning percentage, as well as 6 unbeaten seasons and 4 national titles during his time there. Even though Frank Leahy was winning the job of being head football coach for Notre Dame, the job was getting to him like it does to all Notre Dame football coaches. First off, he wanted to win so bad. With wanting to win so bad, Leahy was willing to take mostly any great athlete that was willing to come to South Bend, even if the athlete couldn't live up to the educational standards of the school. That didn't sit well with the higher-ups of Notre Dame, who were wanting Notre Dame to be a great academic university on par with the Ivies of the East Coast. Leahy was also a fiery man that could turn some people off of him, like most of the higher-ups, who were all mostly quiet, stoic men, a part of a very religious circle. And also, his fiery temper almost nearly killed him in the locker room before a game in mid-1953, as he was having a pancreatic attack and was actually given last rites to him in the locker room before he managed to survive it. With the health scare, Leahy would resign, but Leahy would also say him leaving was more due to the fact that Notre Dame really didn't want him around anymore. And you'll hear more about that in a little bit. With Leahy now gone in January of 1954, Notre Dame would quickly hire a Notre Dame alum to take over. And here comes the star of our story in 25-year-old Terry Brennan. But Terry Brennan did a lot with his life in his first 3 decades on the earth. He was born in Milwaukee in 1928 and was a sports fanatic from birth. He would play baseball and track, but his best sport was football. His play in high school got the attention of Notre Dame, who offered him a spot on their team, and he jumped at the chance. When Terry got to South Bend, the United States were still in World War II, but it was at the tail end of it. So because of that, Frank Leahy wasn't on campus yet, as he wouldn't return from the service until the 1946 season. Brennan would play on the freshman team in 1945, and when Brennan got to varsity, he would play halfback on Leahy's great post-World War II teams, and helped Notre Dame go unbeaten throughout 28 games from 1946 to 1948, with Brennan also running for 1,716 yards and averaging 6 yards a carry during that time. At graduation, Brennan already knew that he was going to be chosen in the 1949 NFL Draft, as he was picked in the 5th round. But he wouldn't play, as he would instead take a job coaching high school football at Mount Carmel High School in 1949. And from 1949 to 52, Brennan would win 3 straight city championships and had many top players go off to play college football. With his Notre Dame background as well as his coaching success, that would bring him back to Notre Dame in 1953 as he would coach the freshman team with a future star in Paul Hornung on it. More about him coming up too. Brennan would now not only be one of the most well-known coaches in America, he would also be the youngest coach ever hired to lead Notre Dame football and made him one of the youngest coaches in the history of all of college football. Brennan's tenure at Notre Dame would kick off great too, as Notre Dame would shut out Texas, which was the first time Texas had been shut out in over 5 years. And Notre Dame would also be ranked in the top 10 throughout the season and end Brennan's first season of 1954 with a 9-1 record. But after that great season, Brennan was immediately hit with some big changes. He wasn't really shocked by any of these changes, as he was given kind of a heads up, as Notre Dame and other schools had warned athletics that a lot of these changes were coming. But what was coming was the start of de-emphasizing college athletics. That meant that there would be some guardrails. It wouldn't be the wild, wild west anymore, where you could give unlimited scholarships, unlimited financial aid, pretty much could do whatever you wanted. Schools would put guardrails on those things, and these guardrails would also be maintained by a new organization, the NCAA. I say new even though the NCAA began around 1906, but starting in 1951, they hired Walter Byers, who would start to watch over schools a lot more and also dole out some big punishments if they didn't stay within these new guidelines of financial aid, scholarships, practices, and the likes. Along with that, the NCAA would also go through their first big change in 1957, as they split into two divisions of the University Division and College Division, and allowing schools to go in a direction of more scholarship athletics, which was in the University Division, or less scholarships, which was the College Division. In addition, the Ivy League schools were going to de-emphasize sports completely, and they were going to play less bigger colleges and move to solely play one another, creating the Ivy League. Notre Dame wouldn't go that far, as they still played a top-notch schedule but denied bowl invites at the end of the season. They heightened academic standards and wouldn't let Brennan recruit all over the country, or at least wouldn't make easy for him to recruit pretty much anyone he wanted, like Leahy did before. So now in only his second year, Brennan had a much different job than his predecessor Leahy did only 2 years ago. The new guidelines didn't hurt Brennan immediately, as the team in 1955 went 8-2 and they had a top 10 ranking again. But the bottom would fall out the next year in 1956, as Brennan, now with his recruits solely picked by him under those new guidelines I mentioned, would have one of the worst, and pretty much the worst, Notre Dame football season up to that point. What made this season worse was that injuries would hit this team, forcing Brennan to play most of his sophomores and also have some players play more positions. There was, however, one bright spot, in that one player had to play pretty much every position. That would be Paul Hornung, who was a backup in 1954 before breaking out in 1955 to have over 1,200 total yards. In 1956, though, Hornung would do it all, as he ran for an average of 4.5 yards per carry, passed over 100 times, led the team in pass breakups as well as second in interceptions, and he also punted the most on the team. Because of doing that, Paul Hornung would win the Heisman Trophy, but unfortunately his talents didn't help out Notre Dame. But the real kicker to this season was the end of this season, as it would end with a real gut punch, as they first traveled to Iowa and lost by 40 points to the Big Ten champion Hawkeyes. They followed that up with a trip to LA and a spirited fight versus USC, but they still lost by 8. The 1956 season was not only terrible on the field, but it was also bad for Brennan off the field. That was because of his former coach and mentor, Frank Leahy, who was making a few more comments about how bad the team had gotten in the short time he was away from the school. Along with Leahy, other alumni and fans were turning on Brennan. And it kind of makes sense, since Notre Dame's worst record before the season was all the way back in 1933, when the team went 3-5-1. So it was a while since fans and alumni saw a bad team. There were some rumors after the season, and I'm just going to preface this next part by saying I've only heard of alumni making this rumor up, but apparently they were looking at a replacement for Brennan after that 1956 season. The replacement being talked about was Joe Kaharick, who made headlines with his teams at University of San Francisco. But after the school had gotten rid of the football team, he coached in the NFL, and he was currently at Washington. There, however, is no account of Notre Dame officials offering Kuharich the job, and also Notre Dame would come out publicly to state that Brennan would be back for the 1957 season. I make mention of this story too because Brennan did sign a 3-year contract, meaning that the 1957 season would be year 4. So not sure if he had signed an extension earlier, but Notre Dame did not come out and fire coaches, and rather have coaches step down like Leahy or pass on the job, like Hunk Anderson did in 1933 after he had a bad season. I think many people were expecting after a really bad season by Brennan, he would quit, but Brennan was not going to quit this job. And the 1957 season would go a lot better for Brennan than 1956, and this was without having Paul Hornung in the lineup, as Notre Dame would start 3-0 with 2 shutouts, and would also come from behind to beat a top 10 Army squad. However, they would hit a brutal stretch of 4 games versus top opponents like Navy, Michigan State, Oklahoma, and Iowa, and could only win 1 of those games. But the one that they did win would be earth-shattering, as they were the first team in over 4 years to beat the vaunted Oklahoma Sooners team, and they did it on the road too. But that win was surrounded by 3 losses, meaning that Notre Dame would end the year at 7-3, so even with the monumental win, the detractors of Brennan were still loud and out there. Brennan's 5th season of 1958 would be a wacky one, as Notre Dame would start out 2-0 and be ranked in the top 5. But then they would finish the season going 4-4, alternating wins and losses every week. And by mid-November, the writing was on the wall that Brennan was going to be gone. And even with a win over ranked Navy and North Carolina, they lost heartbreakers to Purdue and Pitt. And the final game of the season saw Notre Dame beat their rival USC to finish the season 6-4. Now, that would normally be considered pretty good, as the schedule Notre Dame faced was always one of the hardest any team played at that point, and along with the handicaps on the program put on by the school, nothing was really in the favor of Brennan. But it really didn't matter though, as just 2 weeks after that USC win, Brennan and everyone on his staff, except for one guy, that being Hugh DeVore, was fired. According to Terry Brennan, his athletic director at this point, Moose Krause, was even surprised by the decision, and it was clear that he wasn't the one that made it either. After more research, it looks like the president of Notre Dame at this point, Theodore Hesburgh, and others as part of the president's inner circle made the decision. But they really wanted Brennan to step down because, like I mentioned before, they really weren't big fans of firing coaches. They were more fans of the coach coming out and saying that they would like to leave or retire and then just quietly leave. Brennan, however, refused to step down as he didn't want to look like a quitter, so that was why the school made the decision to part ways with him, and they did it very politely and never disparaged Brennan on his character, even calling him one of the best people and a model of Notre Dame. But Notre Dame would still be heavily criticized by the media all over the country, and they would kind of be right, as Brennan had a 32-18 record, but fans of the decision would point to the fact that he went 17-3 over his first 2 years before going 15-15 over the final 3 seasons. The first 2 years of successes weren't given to Brennan either, as they were given to Leahy, since Leahy had recruited all those players. Whatever the case, though, Notre Dame would make the firing official, and they would welcome in a new coach in 1959 as they would hire Joe Kuharich, the guy who was rumored to get the job only 2 years before that. But I'm not going to do a lot on Joe Kuharich because I'm going to do a whole story about him very soon. But ending the story on Terry Brennan, he would never coach again and didn't even stay in football after he left Notre Dame, as he was a player conditioning coach for the Cincinnati Reds in the spring of 1959, and then he would join a Chicago investment banking firm. Brennan would live a long life as he lived up to the age of 93 and died in 2021. He was always an avid fan and watcher of Notre Dame football, but I feel like he was never given any credit for what he did during the 5 years that he was head coach of Notre Dame. The guy only had one losing season, and yes, it was a really bad season. The guy still coached a Heisman Trophy winner. They were one win away from winning the national title in his first season, And I mentioned all the handicaps that this guy had. The next guy who was hired after Brennan also had the same guidelines, and he did even worse than Brennan. But I feel like Brennan is always given the title as the guy who started the downward spiral for Notre Dame for the next decade or so. But what are your thoughts on Terry Brennan? How do you feel like Notre Dame handled the situation, handled hiring him, handled firing him, just handled him being there? Because he really wasn't well talked about during his 5 years there, and I feel like he was always living on the edge throughout the whole time he was there, and maybe that's why he never went back to coaching after being gone. The guy was only 30 years old when he stopped coaching, which is just insane. But anyway, tell me your thoughts about Terry Brennan in the comments below. Of course, make sure you share this video, share this channel with other college football fans. If you aren't already, please subscribe to the channel below, ring the bell so you get updates on brand new videos, and please help out the channel on my Patreon. The link is in the description below.